You're listening to Black Parents Aging, where we help you navigate caring for aging loved ones. Every Wednesday, we'll discuss how to help your parents successfully navigate this new season of life. We are going to talk about legal, health, technology, and finances. Here's your host attorneys, Olivia Smith and Nicola Robinson.
All right, guys, welcome back. This is the third installment with my client and now good friend, Kim Snow, who, if you have listened to the first two, has talked to us about what started with her father as not cooking, kind of forgetting some stuff, and how that progressed and what life was like for her and her father as he got a diagnosis of dementia all the way until he passed. So welcome back, Kim. Thank you. I know, Lord, I got you 3 installments, which I am so grateful for. And I know our listeners are as well, because I know in doing this podcast, it has been amazing. The people who have come forward and who have said, wow, like, thank you for this resource. And so I know that there's somebody listening that is probably dealing with all of this right now and was like, oh my God, like, I didn't know, like, thank you for at least giving me some tidbits or some nuggets so that I can start looking into some stuff. So thank you for coming back for this final installation.
Thank you for having me.
So when we left off last time, it was kind of on a somber note because we were discussing your father's transition and bringing in hospice and what that phase looked like. So we went from noticing some change in behavior to a diagnosis to having to put him into a facility to then having to make the decision that, okay, we are going to do hospice and we're going to do some pain management, but we're no longer going to treat the disease. We're just going to keep him comfortable as he begins to make his transition. So that's where we left off. Now, in all of that is when we met. So how did we meet? Tell them.
A couple of things were going on. So one, it was, because of my dad, I was looking for resources. So I listened to the podcast and I heard all this stuff about estate planning and, all the things that could happen. So when I was hearing that, I was like, oh no. So heard that. And then unfortunately, in the middle of that, my sister passed away also. Unfortunately. And my sister was young, 50 something, and she had a situation and she suddenly passed away. So both things were happening at the same time. So, so I saw that her estate ended up going into probate, which wasn't very messy, but it was messy and unnecessary and expensive. And, in the meantime, I'm looking at my dad's assets, I'm looking at my assets, and I'm like, I don't have any kids. Now I don't have my sister. What should I do? And so I kept listening to the podcast and basically got really nervous and said, let me call them right now. I'm here in Georgia. So I knew that potentially if anything happened to me and with my father still around at the time, I had to make the proper plans for him. And then also make the proper plans for myself since I had no offspring. And now I was down a sister and no one would really know what to do. So I called and then Nicola, that's how we met.
So that's how we met. That's how you came into SR Law. So talk about experience. Like there is somebody listening right now that's like, I know I need to do my estate plan, but it can wait. Or that feels like it's going to be a lot of work and it's going to be hard. So talk about even just the mental side of this, because they're sitting down with me. I think I'm pretty personable. So I think that side's easy, but making the decision to even pick up the phone, I tell people sometimes that's the hardest part. Mm-hmm. So talk about that. Like when you finally because Kim, you're young, you're not, most of my clients are of a certain age and they're like, oh, okay, we should do it. They look at it as like paying taxes. This is kind of that obligatory. I'm going to get this out the way. Mm-hmm. But for somebody that's kind of like, okay, I'm still on the fence, talk about what you went through mentally when you were thinking about making that decision to even pick up the phone.
Yeah, I mean, I had heard about estate planning before, and it just felt like, oh, it's not something that, I should be thinking about right now. I didn't know what at the end, what could happen. So I think being front row to what could happen, that was very helpful in determining, and pushing me to actually make the first call. Cause I'm definitely one that would have said, it could wait, I could do it later, and then I heard other people be like, it's so expensive and it's so this and that, I heard all kinds of excuses that, I kind of hung on to. But
Mhm.
after having that front row seat, I saw how important it was to make these plans and make them be known because, at the end of the day, no one else is going to be there to execute it for you. And also, you don't want to send your loved ones through digging through, the mounds of paperwork that could happen. And on top of that, I really was the only one here for my dad at the
Mhm.
time. So I'm like, wow, this is urgent. Let me call. So that was the first thing out the gate. I said, let me call. And then, Nicola, you went through, kind of the steps. And I was like, wow, that sounds really long, but it makes sense at the end of the day. So yeah, it did sound like a long process, but it really, it's more so conducted like interviews. So, that interviews that you want to go on because you don't always want to go on interviews, but
Oh,
interviews that you want to go on. It also gave fodder to think about because there were questions that were asked that I never really even considered in terms of my family, who can do what. I must say, Nicola really challenged me because I thought one way, and then she said, hey, that doesn't always happen. This could happen, or that could happen. And she gave me other scenarios that I didn't even think about before. So once I was in the process, it was like, wow, I'm so glad that I did this because these are things that I didn't even think about. So, preparing for, ultimately what could happen and also making sure my dad was taken care of was really the drivers. And, I thought that it was a great process. It wasn't that many interviews, maybe two or three. And, and I mean, I think my overall estate is it's a little bit complicated, but the fact that I don't have any heirs as far as children, it really doesn't make it as cookie cutter. So, there were some things that I really had to think about and some people I had to notify and tell things and really think about what I would like in the event, God forbid, something happened to me. I could prepare for all of that.
Mm. And so I tell people, and you can chime in on this, I tell people, you're not really sitting down with me to get this document. This isn't real. The document is the end result. This is the proof of what we've done. But
Mhm.
what you're coming to me for is counsel and advice. So you're coming because there's so many things you probably have not thought about. But because of my legal expertise and my experience, I can say, hey, well, have you given any thought to this scenario or what if these things happened? What would be the backup plan for that? So it is more of talking you through, helping you to navigate like who you want as the people in your particular estate plan. And then I just look at it as kind of the bonus is you get it memorialized on these documents.
Mhm, mhm,
But the work is on the client to really kind of think through mentally, figure out what makes the most sense for them. So,
mhm.
I mean, would you agree? Because I think that's what we do.
Yeah, I mean, I would say probably 60% of the stuff that's in, my estate plan is stuff that I never thought about. So, and I think are important. At the end of the day, yes, I totally agree. And I think talking through that really helped. And thinking about like who would be the most responsible in this case. It might not be always the person that you say, well, automatically it should be this person because other people have determined that it should go in a certain succession, but it's not always the case. So you want to always put responsible people and you want to make what you want known so and written on paper and
Mhm.
enforceable. And I think what's great about this process is that I'm the type of person who just wants to get to the end result, and I don't like to do a whole bunch. So I love that Nicola gave me a list of here's your to-dos, here's what you need to figure out, and then on our next session come back to me with these answers. So I think the biggest takeaway is that it gave all the things to think about and who would be most responsible what do you want? What would you want in this scenario? So, you get all these scenarios that you might not have thought about. So
you said you were in the thick of it. So let's just back up for a second. So did your sister do any estate planning? The one that had passed away?
So my sister did what she thought was estate planning. I mean, she wrote out a will
By hand, on paper?
on paper.
Okay.
Yeah, she wrote out a will, and she wrote out a will when her circumstances were different. So it was interesting reading it. I didn't know that she wrote out a will. So when I saw it, it was considering that, and it's kind of funny when I think about it, but considering, stuff like, oh, she considered one scenario that if her and her husband passed away at the same time, she said that I would get her kids, which she didn't tell me.
So you're like, wait a minute.
Yeah, I was like, wait a minute, like what? I really been raising these kids, and I'm about 11 years younger than that sister. So when she wrote this, I was probably 20 something, and, and her kids. It would have been really interesting me raising kids of that age, but her kids are older at this time. They're 21, 22, and 26. So, it's different. So I didn't need to raise them. But yeah, she wrote out a will and she tried to consider different options. It's something that she just kind of went off in her own head. But however, she had property. So you just can't write out what happens to property. You know what I mean? And she didn't even address the property in that. So even if, let's say, I did get the kids, I still would have had to probate with the house. So so there's those measures and things that you don't think about. I mean, it was unthinkable that my sister would just pass away, suddenly. She wasn't ill. There was no, we had no warning. So we didn't talk a ton about, what would happen, what did she want, what were her wishes. We didn't know any of that stuff. We still don't know her passwords to this day.
Oh, wow.
So,
In the society that we live in now, so much is done online, right? So social media, there's crypto, there's banks that don't even have physical banks. It's all online. So there could be potentially all this stuff still out there. We can't even get into her computer to even get to any of that
correct.
stuff.
And not only that, there's sentimental things going, pictures going. I mean, it's just gone.
That's a great point. And I think sometimes we don't think about that. It's just like, I know I'm terrible. I ain't printed a picture since like for real. My kids would be like, film, what's that?
Yep.
They're all in the cloud. So
Yep.
their entire childhood is trapped in the cloud right now. So if something was to happen to me, they wouldn't have access to that because I've made no provisions for it. I'm just being me. I'm just as guilty as some of us. But your sister did at least think I needed something in writing.
Right.
But she never went back to update it.
Right.
She did not go to an attorney to help her think or navigate through some different scenarios to say, okay, well, what do you want to see happen with the property? Well, what happens if the children are still minor versus if they are adults? Or if the people you listed and written out on this paper, you're no longer in relationships with, what would that look like? So it doesn't sound like any of that transpired.
None of that transpired.
Okay. So then you're in the thick of probate. So how did that go? Without getting all into, too much, but
yeah, I mean, well, I don't really know the weeds in her case. We were trying to avoid it. So she's married. So that was helpful, but the way that, long story short, the way that they structured their things was her husband already had a house before he married her, and then she kind of bought this house, and they kind of, moved like, a modern couple, let's call it.
right.
So all of the paperwork wasn't necessarily easily discoverable. So it was a good, probably, my brother-in-law was in probate for probably a year in order to get all of that paperwork combed through and, his name on it. I mean, even though they were married and we knew this to be marital property, his name wasn't really on anything. So in order to redo that, that's when he had to do his estate plan, because now it's him and his kid, like his sons, my nephews, that, he has it outlined what's to happen with that. So, but yeah, she didn't have there was no like legal paperwork prior to her passing away. So
you dealt with that. Then your
Hmm.
father passed in June. And did
Hmm.
he have any estate planning?
So that was the interesting part. I went through all of that. And I mean, the way with my dad, we structured his life, he didn't have assets. So, he didn't have a house, he didn't have a car. So I'm like, well, feels like we're good. So the prior to him passing away, or actually when he went to retirement, the way that we could choose his pension was, you could choose where somebody like a beneficiary gets after they die or whatever.
Mhm.
So we were like, let's not do that. Let's use that, or like let's take the full amount, and then whatever's left over from, whatever's left over liquid, let's just put it into a life insurance policy. Now, one of the things that I took away from that is that he was 60 something when he got this life insurance policy. So I think, a lot of people think they're too old when they're in their 60s. He was able to get fully insured when he was
Mm,
late, it was late 60s. So
okay.
that's how he kind of set that up. So we're thinking we're good. Well, at least I was. I was thinking we're good. He doesn't have assets. Pension ends when he dies, so don't have to worry there. Social Security ends when he dies. Okay, we're good. Out of nowhere, I get a letter from his pension that, hey, there's this, money left over and who's there to claim it? So guess who's in probate?
Oh, listeners, what Kim is saying is her and her dad thought they were good. They put this together. Now, Kim, did you and your dad, I'm assuming y'all did all this pre-dementia, before the diagnoses and all that. Most of that
Yes.
had handled.
Yep.
And you didn't go to an attorney at that point to say, let's figure out what needs to be in place. Am I correct on that?
You're correct. We went to actually a financial planner at the time.
Somebody that is not an attorney that
Right,
handles this space. Okay, just want to make
right,
sure people
right,
understand. People, sometimes we don't stay in our lanes, and so, or we go to the wrong professional.
right. The advice was good. It just didn't go into the legal part of it. So, he's the one that was kind of like, all right, you have these five options for your pension. Four of these have beneficiaries included. This one doesn't. So, this one will give you the capital you need to put into a life insurance policy. So we're like, great, let's do that. Let's pick this one. So now in my head, I'm recording that. Oh, okay. Well, nothing will be left. No beneficiary needs to be noted.
Mm-hmm.
So that's what I'm thinking. And then, so I remember this. So now I'm thinking like, okay, he has no assets. He has no this, no that. There's nothing to really estate plan for him. And surprise, here we are, and I get this letter and I keep on meeting roadblocks because there's no way that I'm able to claim this because they don't know who I am. I'm not listed on anything, even though I tried everything. I was like, here's my birth certificate. He's my dad. They're like, no, we don't know who you are unless you can give this letter of test of whatever it is. No.
Letters of testamentary, which is
Yes.
what you get from the probate courts. And so now Kim is forced to have to probate her father's estate because there was money left from his retirement. And in order for her to get those funds are now a part of his estate. And so we have to open his estate. We have to go through all of the steps of probate here under Georgia law before those funds can then be deposited into the estate. Deal with if there are any creditors or whatever the case may be, all that has to be dealt with. And then after everything is dealt with, will the funds even be distributed to Kim as his heir? But that process is not just a knock knock, call the courts, here they hand you this paper, you hand it to the retirement company. No, we have to actually go through this, and this is going to take a couple of months. So Kim and I have just started on that process. But I just wanted to point out, sometimes we think we got it. Like, all this stuff makes sense, look good on paper. We should be avoiding probate, should be easy. And no shade to the financial planner, like he gave you the options that made sense in terms of what you guys were trying to accomplish. And so sometimes I have to just let people know, like, he's helping grow money, he's helping move money. I'm helping to avoid court, I'm helping to protect money. So we do different things. And it's not to say, oh, well, I got advice from my financial planner. That's one. We're good. You kind of need both because sometimes the way they view things is very different than the way I view things in terms of, well, okay, here's the consequence legally to the option that he may have just given you. And I'll give people a good example. I just had some clients recently. I had to sit them down. Their father wanted them to inherit property, and so that he just transferred it to them. No big deal. When he dies, they will get this property. Seems easy peasy, no big deal. Avoids probate. Nobody has to worry about it. But then when I look at it and I'm like, that's not wrong. That's not bad advice. But if you guys want to sell this property down the road, you're going to have a huge tax issue. Nobody talked to them about tax.
Yes.
And so that's what I mean. I'm trained to look at these consequences and look at the scenario just a little bit different than a financial planner or somebody that was just like, do a quick claim deed. It's easy. It is. But here's this other stuff that you don't think about. And so that's why lawyers are called counselors, because we counsel you on all these moves you're trying to make. And so that's the point that I just wanted people to understand. It's like nothing wrong with the advice he gave you, nothing wrong with the step you took. Here's just this other thing that you probably should have considered when you guys, I say, make whatever decision you're gonna make with all of the information. Y'all just didn't have this information to know, hey, if there's money left, you're going to end up in probate court. So here's what we could have done to prevent that from going into probate court.
Right. I would say when you're planning with your elderly or planning for your parents or even your grandparents, if they're still, around, you truly need a team. You truly need a team. Don't think just because they don't have this, they don't have property, they don't have, no. There's always a scenario, or they can be a scenario where, at the end, there's money there you didn't know about, or, so because I wouldn't even be surprised if I discovered some other account somewhere else, that I didn't know about. He was in the military. There's that, there's a few things that happened before I came into the picture. So I wouldn't be surprised if I found other money, but I wasn't thinking that way. I thought that I knew everything my dad had, but like you said, it's a team effort. It's the financial planners. It's also having an attorney there who knows, even walking through various scenarios. What happens if your loved one gets dementia at a point? What happens to their assets? Who sells it? What are the tax implications? Because those do happen.
Definitely some taxes. Listen, we do not avoid taxes, people. We minimize taxes, but we don't avoid. They want money.
Yes. So, I think that, in hindsight now and seeing it from my perspective now, I think that, you need a team of people there that are really schooled and have knowledge about this that can help you navigate through this because, at the end of the day, my issues were a little smaller. And I really prided myself, hey, I don't need to go on probate for my dad. And it's like, look at me now. But, at the end of the day, in the grand scheme of things, I prepared as well as I could, but I could have did better.
Well, Kim, thank you so much just for all 3 episodes, like for sharing this whole journey over the last couple of years. Like, through getting to know you, I was like, people need to hear this. People need to understand because nobody's talking about this. I mean, that was really the impetus for why we even created the show. We were getting so many kids coming in and they were just like, I have no idea what I'm doing. I don't know what my parents' assets are. I don't know what I'm supposed to be doing with those assets. I don't know what resources to pay for or what's nursing home, what's assisted living, what's Medicaid, what's Medicare. Like they were just overwhelmed with all this stuff. And it's one of those things that it's not like you read that on your vacation on the beach to get yourself familiar. It's when you are in the thick of it, when you need it, that you're just like, oh my God, I got to learn all this new stuff. And maybe you are still working, or maybe you're taking care of a family and now you're thrown into the role of caregiver on top of all the other things that you had going on in your life. So we started the show just to say, here's some nuggets, here's some information. know it now before you actually need it. And then if you do need it, we're here and use this as a resource. So thank you for being a part of the resources that we are now creating for those people who might be dealing with all the stuff that you just went through.
Yes, thank you for having me.
Any last words, any final, like, hey, if y'all don't hear nothing else, this is what I want y'all to remember.
Yeah, I do have some last words. I tell my friends this. I say, you can put it off all you want to, but this is urgent. If you have parents who do not have a plan, if you have any of your loved ones in your life that you will be responsible for, this is urgent. This is urgent. Even if you do one small step, there's small steps that you can take towards this. Just make the phone call and see, what can you do? What's at risk even to learn that it's urgent. It's not something you can put off. So I think if you can walk away with one thing today, it's do not put this off. Make your life easier. So that's all I can really say about that. I still made it urgent and I still, had a little bit left over, but I think, there are way complicated situations, especially when you add in, steps and, wives, husbands, kids from first marriage. Like as your situation gets more complicated, then it ends up hurting families. So if there's one thing to walk away with, this is urgent. This is urgent.
You heard it for the people in the back. This is urgent. Thank you so much, Kim. It has been awesome. All right, guys, that's it for this episode. Until next time, bye.
Thanks for joining us this week on Black Parents Aging. Check out our Facebook group at Black Parents Aging, where we go live to answer your questions. For more info on today's topic, check out the show notes on our website, srlawgrp.com. If you know someone who could benefit from today's episode, please share a link to the show. Subscribe to the show to catch new episodes and leave a review. Until next week.